Protests turned destructive in downtown Seattle tonight. Here's what we know. Since then, we have seen widespread looting. 200 members of the Washington National Guard have been called up to come into Seattle. 75 have been deployed to Seattle tonight. The other 100.
I am also taking swift and decisive action to protect our great capital, Washington, D.C. What happened in this city last night was a total disgrace. As we speak, I am dispatching thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers, military personnel, and law enforcement officers to stop the rioting, looting, vandalism, assaults, and the wanton destruction of property.
Hello everyone. Hey, Alfred Johnson back at you again this evening, coming with some pertinent information, especially as it leads right up to this election that's coming up. Of course, the things that I'm communicating, I'm expressly wanting to address the black community, my race, my people. I understand that, of course, generally the United States is my people and all races are really just one. We're just the human race, but we understand that we have certain common experiences that create a distinction between the so-called races. And so today I do want to again affirm that I'm speaking to my race, to my people, and of course also to the Browns, to the Hispanics and things of this sort. And so we're going to be addressing again some very key issues, some very critical issues. Now listen, here's what I'm going to need for you to do during this time, especially right here before the election. I'm asking that you share these videos, especially to your friends, people who need to be informed about certain aspects of history that are being distorted. Okay, so we're having to bring some clarity to our race so that we can be objective in how we vote. We can be thinking right. It's very important to remember that we think right, and that's what I'm hoping to do through these videos, is help us to have a perspective of history and how things actually occurred so that we can move forward with confidence and with peace. Okay, and so on my first video, I went ahead and let you know how the enemy either hides truth or distorts truth. We mentioned how censorship is now done. Censorship means hiding the truth or keeping the truth from you. And people now do that not by forcibly keeping the truth from you or hiding it. Now they do it by just flooding you with information that's irrelevant, misinformation, just lies, or just a bunch of other drama just to keep you from focusing. And then I mentioned that the other thing was to tap into an area of anxiety or hatred in order to make us have our eyes set against our fellow man and be against them. In our case in America, there is a move to set all of our eyes against the white American male in particular. And we seem to be moving in that direction as a nation and as a race, but we have to get away from that. Those are lies and distortions. And so today I'm going to speak to you about the history of our country. You know, there are misconceptions about the founding of our country and the ideas that were behind it. And one of the ones in particular had to do with the Constitution itself. And so there's been a lot said about and against the American Constitution. Again, the younger generation is being taught a bunch of sheer distortions, and it's quite sad. And it's turning young people, both blacks and whites, against the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and the nation that has benefited both us and the nations of the world in a way that no other nation ever has. This is the greatest there is, and if there is one better, we don't know it. No one knows it. So instead of trying to destroy the best there is, in order to go into a big question mark, where are we going? What are we planning on changing into? There is no country on the face of the earth better. And the nations that seem to be better, they seem to have greater income. They really don't. The only reason it seems to be that way is that they have Big Brother, the United States of America, with a very massive military as their allies. So the Western nations, people mention Sweden, yeah, Can you imagine Sweden having to actually build its own powerful military in order to defend itself against its near neighbors and against larger nations like Russia? If they actually had to fund their full military in the way it would have to be if they were a standalone country, then you would see that they're not near as rich as it seems that they are. When you have the United States of America as your ally, and we have a massive military, the United States is actually 50 states united as one nation, 50 nations united as one. Very powerful. We are very potent. And in many of our states, just many of our individual states, generate more revenue and money than whole nations do. Okay, so we're dealing with a very massive, powerful union here. And so in terms of military force, we're able to bring defense to countries so that they don't have to spend as much on their military, and therefore they can spend it on their people. So that kind of situation, you can't compare that to the United States of America. We are experiencing great general prosperity, even though we're supporting all these different countries. Furthermore, the blacks that are in our country, we make more on average than blacks anywhere around the world, and especially from where we came from. But we make way more money here. We are way more prosperous here. We are way more free here than anywhere on the planet. So the idea, I want to address the idea that our Constitution itself is a racist constitution. And remember, they have to make you hate the Constitution in order for you to hate America. You have to hate the ideas to make you want to hate the country. They have to also give you a bunch of information, misinformation, irrelevant information. Remember I told you, distractions, so that you don't see things the way they really are. They'll tell you that the Constitution was written for whites. Now, folks, it doesn't matter what quote they find from somebody at that time. What they're going to end up doing is taking our prejudices of today and then putting them into the minds of the people who are actually doing the writing. It is true that our Constitution was a European expression. That shouldn't surprise anybody. The different people who wrote it came from Europe. There was already a political system that was set up in Europe that had evolved over hundreds of years, even thousands of years. Okay? The ideas that we have that are actually in our Constitution are an evolution of those ideas that have passed through centuries. And in fact, it was a European expression. They weren't, however, prejudiced against this Constitution applying to all races. As a matter of fact, many of the founders looked with a sense of honor and a sense of somberness on the fact that we have the opportunity to recommend to the world a form of constitution or a form of government that was based on liberty, that was based on self-determination, that is, a people literally establishing laws that are above government, above all the other humans. This is the rule of law and liberty. They wanted to be able to recommend this to all nations. I remember George Washington said it very plainly, and Madison really declared it. In the Federalist Papers, this is the book that they used to argue out the Constitution before it was actually written. They mentioned how serene or how serious a matter it was that we were creating the kind of Constitution that we were creating. It had nothing to do with race, people. When you hear people say the Constitution was written just for the white man, that's just completely ridiculous. It's utterly and patently ridiculous. And it doesn't really matter if the whites that were living at any particular time viewed it that way. What does that matter? So let's imagine there were some racist whites that in history, they took pride in the fact that the United States rose to such greatness and they owned the Constitution as a white document for whites. Who cares what their opinion of that is? Obviously, they're not in control of history. Obvious, because here I am standing before you, and there are black billionaires all over the place, millionaires all over the place. There are people who are doing very, very well in the country, whether they liked it or not. But I can tell you that the great majority of our founders didn't think that way at all. So the Constitution is not a racist document, folks. There's nothing in it that speaks of racism. I'm going to talk about a few things that people like to distort in order to make it seem as if the Constitution is racist. But folks, it's a laying down of laws. You have the Article 1 that dealt with Congress. You had Article 2 that dealt with the chief executive or the president. Article 3 dealt with the Supreme Court, and then other laws. And that was pretty much that. Very little said about white or black anywhere in the Constitution. The issues that dealt with slavery came about later in the Constitution. especially as it was talking about the power of the Congress. But let me go ahead and cover a few of them. Number one, slavery is not enshrined in our Constitution. That's ridiculous. Number one, before the Constitution was ever established, the United States already existed. There were articles of confederation that united the states that then existed. Okay, that happened to be the law of the land at that time, but it was just a weak expression of a union. There were certain provisions that were not made that would force a state to do certain things that might need to be done, especially during war. Very weak powers in terms of taxing states so that the government could become strong and so that regulation could be had uniformly in the country at that time. Our Constitution was written to address that. However, slavery was already in existence in the United States. Before our Constitution was actually written, slavery already existed. The southern states were already slave states. It was not going to be possible. It's totally not practicable, and there's no reason for us to get upset about it, that when the Constitution came together and when our country first came together, we were going to have to deal with this issue of slavery. If the founders were going to be trying to make slavery against the law at the time of the Constitution, then the Union could have never come together. The Union would have never have come together. The southern states would have made certain that they did not join that Union, because remember, they had to actually vote on that Union. They had to vote on that Constitution. And if the southern states were put aside because they had slaves and slavery wouldn't be allowed in this new Constitution, well, then you'd have an arrangement where you had northern powers who perhaps agreed with the Constitution, and then southern powers that would have been slaves whatsoever. Number one, there's a question about whether or not the North would have agreed with that. But then there's the question of rivalries. If we did go north and south, all we would have done is set up a situation for future wars, future big wars between the North and the South, and because trades would have to be made and alliances with other countries and everything else. There would be trade disputes between the North and the South, all kinds of stuff, and there would have been war and there'd have been great bloodshed.